By now, we have all become very conversant with the tribal world in India. The diversity, the variety of color and culture of the tribal people and their interactional issues with the non-tribal people and the kind of problems they have been facing within themselves and much more based on their interactions with the non-tribal people, particularly the kind of exploitation they have faced all through ever since they came into contact for the first time with civilization. There are inherent dilemmas. Time has come now for us to think as to what can be done in meaningfully dealing with the tribals and their problems, particularly making them part of the larger reality called democratic India. The inherent dilemmas are: should tribal be allowed to flourish in their own ways with their own identity, or should they be allowed totally to live in isolation? Because if tribal people have to flourish with their own identity, they should not mix up with the non-tribal people, or if they do mix up, the non-tribal people must give them the total freedom to live their own style of life. Is it possible? Should we encourage this, or should we ask them to become a part of the mainstream? But does it not mean that we are fine with the modern civilization life and we in a way ask the tribal people to copy the civilization? Are we happy with the civilized life? Are there not problems in civilization? Why should we keep civilization as the model for everyone to live? Is it not a bias in favor of the modern ways? Are you not happy with the diversity of tribal life, the color, the costume, the culture, their folk variety? Are you not happy with it? Anybody who have seen the Rajpath tableaus on the Independence Day and Republic Day would have enjoyed watching the tableaus of tribal areas. In fact, every state has some tribals or the others living in the state, and most of the tableaus presented by different states invariably include presentation of the diversity of the tribals in that particular state. If we have enjoyed watching this diversity, should we not try to retain? What does it mean actually? If we want to retain this, allow the tribal people to live their own life with full identity of their culture and the diversity, does it not mean in a way we are trying to build up a human zoo for showing to the world? There are very many questions inherent into this issue of making tribals part of the larger reality called India. But then the question of allowing them to join the mainstream, where is the mainstream? Larger Hindu society. Are we happy with the larger Hindu society, particularly when we think of the caste ridden ways of life of the people, particularly the example of the scheduled caste, for instance, who are the bottommost? And whenever tribal people become part of this caste structure, we have witnessed that they become a further level, further below the scheduled caste people. That means, they become the bottommost. Now, what is this dilemma of ethnic diversity versus assimilation? A word about assimilation. Assimilation means the people of a different culture come and become a part of a larger cultural group and lose their identity and adopt the ways of life of the larger reality. Can this happen when tribal people become a part of it? Will they be assimilating completely with all their diverse ethnic groups? Will they really assimilate at all? What does it mean when they assimilate? Will they become equal? Can equality prevail after tribal people become part of a larger reality, particularly in India, the larger reality called the caste system with its established hierarchy? Caste system has a unique characteristic. Any time a new group comes and joins and becomes a part of the hierarchy, the new group normally goes bottom bound in the hierarchy rather than higher positions. Then what will happen when tribals become part of this larger reality? That brings us to the basic issue of tribal identity. When we want to make tribal people part of the larger population in India, does it mean they will be allowed to retain their identity, or will they lose their identity? We know too well that tribal people have their distinct socio-cultural life. In fact, even physically they often look different, and forget about their language. There is no language, as we have understood earlier. There is some system of communication, and they are not very comfortable with the language spoken by the non-tribal people. Then what will happen? How do they interact? Will their differentness make them completely different within the larger population? That means, retaining the identity within the larger population also in a way means they will be cornered. Will there be a fraternal feeling when they become part of the larger community in India? So, the basic issues are equality. Tribals, when they become part of the larger population, must still become equal to others. Is it possible? Sustainable inclusion, sustainable from both angles. Once the tribals become a part of the larger population, this becoming part should also be sustainable over succeeding generations. The other side of sustainability is the tribal people must be able to sustain this inclusion, maintaining their distinct identity. Is it possible? It is, with people's participation. But how far people's participation is feasible along with the tribals and the non-tribal population? Our history of interaction, of exploitation by non-tribals of the tribal people does not permit us to assume that there will be full-fledged people's participation when tribals become part of the larger reality. Now, tribal diversity, when it is steamrolled, that means when all the tribals become a part of the larger population, the term steamrolling, that means irrespective of their original nature and diversity that we have seen in tribal life, they invariably become part of the larger population. What does that mean? Is it mean that they will lose their original identity, original uniqueness at all? Actually, whenever programs are drawn up for the tribal people, either in the name of development or in the name of welfare, what happens is programs are made generic. That means, there is a tribal program which is uniformly applied to all tribals throughout the country or throughout the state, depending on whether the program is drawn by the federal structure or under the provincial government. When such is the case, what will happen to the tribal identity? What will happen to their unique features in their cultural life, the grandeur of their colorful life? What happens to it? Programs, strictly speaking, will have to be custom made. That means, emphasizing on the special features and particular aspects of the colorful life of the tribal people, whatever program is drawn up in the name of development and welfare must be custom made, identifying these unique features of this particular tribe. I do not think this is happening, and this might probably happen, because this calls for lot of patient thinking, analysis and complete recognition of the diversity of the tribal life, if this has to happen at all, and administrators and implementers do not have the patience and time to go through this. There is a vital question also: when tribals become a part of the larger population, will their voices be heard at all? After all, we have already understood that their language is different. They are not comfortable with the language that is spoken by the non-tribal people, and forget about the non-tribal people. They have never been comfortable dealing with the tribal people unless it brings them income, it brings them easy and fast money. Therefore, the non-tribal people will not bother basically when it comes to identifying and accepting the voices of the tribal people who have become now part of the population along with them. It is doubtful whether this voice of the tribal people will be heard at all when they become part of the larger population then. There is an interesting concept that comes up: assimilation or integration. Assimilation, we have beautifully understood, that means a person or a group of people who join a larger population take up the ways of life and thinking and rituals, anything that is in practice with the larger population. That means they will lose their identity. Integration means, as such, keeping their identity, they will become part of the larger population. Now, the dilemma is it assimilation or integration? Much of what we have been talking about so far in this episode brings us down to the basic debate, assimilation or integration. Assimilation, we have just minimally understood, means any larger group where the smaller group comes and joins will guide the ways of life of the people for the newly joined group. That means, the newly joined group takes up to the ways of the larger group. Integration means the newly joined group retains its original special features and still manages to live in coexistence with the larger group. Now, this debate of assimilation or integration becomes vital when we think of bringing tribal people as a part of the larger population in India. Will assimilation make way for identity to disappear? It is a very ticklish question. Assimilation basically means that the people of the newer group who join the larger group lose their original identity, because they are taking up to the ways of the larger population. Then identity certainly may have to disappear, but then can integration allow retention of identity? Yes and no, because when people integrate, they do retain their identity, but then in retaining identity, they lose their recognition of equality, because with their identity they are placed in a different level with respect to the larger population. Now, joining the mainstream therefore might lurk around the corner the danger of loss of identity. Now, more and more programs based on uniformity, whether a provincial government or federal government plans tribal development and welfare programs, they have a uniform framework which is uniformly applied to the entire tribal world in the country. Is it meaningful? Is it purposeful? Does it mean anything for the tribal people at all? Does it mean we are recognizing the unique features of the particular tribe? Unless we recognize, there is no question of encouraging the tribal people to retain their special features. More and more programs should be identifying the retention of the unique features. That means, the program should be sort of custom made. Now, this brings us to debate of solving the dilemma between integration and assimilation, a concept of integrative assimilation. Is it not an oxymoron? The two opposites brought together in one expression. Integration means one retains the identity and becomes a part. Assimilation means one loses the identity and becomes a part. Therefore, it sounds like an oxymoron, but if you dig a little deep into the meaning of the term integrative assimilation, the Hindu society is a marvelous example in the world. Have not Hindus included people from different cultures, different ethnic varieties, different languages and different parts of the world? They have all become part of the Hindus, but still they retain their identity and Hindus are fine with it. So, the Hindu way of life is a marvelous ready example of accepting people of different identities and allow them to live in their middle. Can this happen with the tribal people? Perhaps the history of exploitation that they have gone through in the hands of non-tribal people does not permit us to assume that this could happen with the tribal people. Tribal people, whenever they have become part of the interactional pattern with the non-tribal people, have always been looked down upon. Now, when these tribal people become part of larger India, can this happen, that they will be treated with respect? If you look deep into the concept of integration, it looks like it is a one-way process. Whoever joins from a smaller community to the larger reality now integrates in the sense it is a one-way process. That means, the larger group determines the ways in which the smaller group which joins them is going to deal with the everyday situation. Tribals, whenever they have become part of the structure within the rural communities, for instance, they have become part of the caste hierarchy, but they are always seen as outsiders. They are down at the bottom of the structure, and when they become part of a nearby town or a city, again they are seen as outsiders. They became in a way in the class structure bottom level, that means seen as minority. So, tribals have lived with this both negatives, that is being seen as outsiders on the one hand and being seen as the minority people on the other hand. But we come to one positive aspect when it comes to tribal life and tribals becoming part of the larger reality of the population in our country, that is the concept of conservation. Lot of times we talk about getting the people educated for conservation of the biodiversity for which Indian subcontinent is very famous. Do we have to teach conservation to the tribal people? No. Strictly speaking, we have lessons to learn from the tribal people regarding conservation of the environment and the harmony of nature, because no tribe ever has worked against disturbing the harmony of nature. They have been the marvelous examples throughout the world, particularly in India, of conserving the biodiversity and conserving the harmony of nature. So, we do not have to tell them how to work for conserving. Now, the thing is, the conservation logic taken to the tribals is basically unnecessary, because they are already honoring it. But the thing is, the development paradigm has brought into focus different aspects in tribal life. Tribals in a way are at the crossroads. Development without loss of moorings, in every tribal settlement you find that there is a civilization. We have to identify. Now, we come to a very crucial argument coming up in the recent times. We always contrasted tribal people with civilization. We even use the expression uncivilized or non-civilized to the tribal people. Civilization means the non-tribal people. Are we a ready example of how meaningfully one could live in a larger community? Yes and no. There are polished ways of civilization, in respect of which we could always look at tribal people as rustic and unpolished, but then dig deeper. In fact, I would like to refer to beautiful statement made by Robert Redfield and Milton Singer. He said, look deep into the tribal way of life, you will find every tribe is a kind of a civilization in itself. Look deep into the ways of life of the people in the non-tribal world, you will find there are pockets of tribal lifestyle. That means, there is civilization in every tribe and there is tribal way in every civilization. So, let us forget about contrasting civilization and tribe. In fact, a ready example you must see here as to the distinction between civilization and tribe is, take for instance, a tribe. In fact, a woman could go away walking right in the middle of the tribe in the middle of the night, very safe and secure if it is a tribal situation. You know what happens when a woman walks like this alone in the middle of the night in a town or a city in the so called civilized world? You just do not know what is going to happen. So, that means, the meaning of the expression that there is civilization in every tribe, that means we have to see the finer ways of dealing with their women, the finer ways of and the values of the people in the tribal world, which are of vital value. So long as we recognize this, there is a way to treat the tribals if we want them to become a part of the larger reality. Now, in this dialogue so far, what you have understood is two things in the main, that is, number one is the issue of tribal identity. Number two is the issue of making the tribal people part of the larger reality called India. Where do you draw the balance? So long as the non-tribal people do not recognize that tribal people are unique in their own ways, and number two, There are a lot of things that we need to learn from the tribal people, and so long as the larger population does not see the basic issue that there are a lot of things that we need to learn from the tribal people in order to make the life for everybody in this subcontinent, in our country, meaningful, happy and comfortable. Unless this change comes about among the non-tribal people, it becomes very difficult to make tribal people part of the larger mainstream in our country, so that they can become equal participants in the democratic experiment called India.